Fluorescent lights hum in the corridor of a federal prison hospital in Springfield, Missouri. It is March 12, 2026. A nurse pushes a cart past a locked door. Inside, an old man lies under a thin blanket, an intravenous line taped to his arm. He is 88 years old and dying of cancer. His name is Walter Kendall Myers. His great-grandfather was Alexander Graham Bell, the man who invented the telephone. He inherited a famous American family name, an elite education, and a top-secret clearance at the United States State Department. And for 30 years, working from an apartment in Northwest Washington, he handed Cuba America's secrets without ever asking for a single dollar. How does a man born into the American aristocracy end up working for Havana? What did Cuba see in him that American counterintelligence missed for 3 decades? And how did the FBI finally catch him on his own 72nd birthday? Walter Kendall Myers was born in Washington in the spring of 1937. His mother came from the family that had run the National Geographic Society for 4 generations. His grandfather had been its president. His father was a physician. And on his mother's side, he was the great-grandson of Alexander Bell, the man who filed the first patent for the telephone. The family had money. The family had a name. Kendall, as a boy, had everything an American of his generation could have wanted. He was sent to a private boarding school, then to Brown University, then to the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, where in 1972 he earned a doctorate in European Studies. In 1977, at the age of 40, he took a job as a contract instructor at the State Department's Foreign Service Institute. This was the place where America trained its future diplomats. Kendall Myers' job was to teach them. His students would go on to serve as ambassadors, embassy officers, and analysts in nearly every American mission in the world. He was, in that role, a small but permanent piece of American intelligence infrastructure. That is the man Cuba noticed. In the fall of 1978, a Cuban diplomat gave a talk at the Foreign Service Institute. His name was Carlos Ciano. He was based at the Cuban mission to the United Nations in New York. On paper, he was a cultural attaché. In reality, he was an intelligence officer for the Dirección General de Inteligencia, Cuba's spy service, the DGI. Ciano was charming. He spoke good English. He knew how to make Americans feel that Cuba was misunderstood. After his talk, he stayed in Washington for a few days. A young State Department analyst named Wendy Grieder threw a brunch for him at her apartment on 24th Street in Foggy Bottom. At that brunch, Ciano met Kendall Myers. 2 months later, in December of 1978, Kendall accepted an invitation from Ciano to visit Cuba for 2 weeks. He took a small notebook with him. He wrote in it every day. That diary, which the FBI would recover 30 years later, is the closest thing we have to a real-time record of an American becoming a foreign spy. Cuba is so exciting, he wrote after his first day in Havana. The revolution is moral without being moralistic. Fidel has lifted the Cuban people out of the degrading conditions which characterized pre-revolutionary Cuba. He has helped the Cubans save their own souls. And this is the sentence. I have become so bitter these past few months. Watching the evening news is a radicalizing experience. The abuses of our system, the complacency about the poor, the inability of those who are oppressed to recognize their own condition. This was not a confused young man. He was 41 years old, educated, established, already inside the State Department. He was writing, in a hotel in Havana, that his own country made him bitter. Cuban intelligence read that diary the same year Kendall did. They knew exactly what they had. 6 months after the Cuba trip, in the summer of 1979, Kendall was staying with his partner, Gwendolyn Steingraber, in South Dakota. She lived there at the time. They had met a few years earlier. She was smart, sharp-tongued, a divorced woman with grown children. She loved him. On a summer day in South Dakota, Carlos Ciano showed up at the door. The formal recruitment happened in that house. The FBI would piece it together later from admissions the couple made after their arrest. Ciano told them what Cuba wanted. He told them how it would work. He told them the names they would use. Kendall would be Agent 202. Gwendolyn would be Agent 123. They said yes.
There was no money to blackmail them with, no debt to leverage, no criminal record. What Cuba had recruited was harder to defend against. A scholar who believed Havana was the moral answer to Washington, a woman who believed in Kendall, and a shared conviction that they were being written into history. They married in 1982. They asked Cuba for nothing. By 1985, Kendall Myers had a top-secret clearance from the United States government. He transferred out of teaching and into the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, the INR, the State Department's own internal intelligence shop. From that desk, he could see far more than the European affairs he officially covered. Through the 80s, communication with Havana was almost old-fashioned. Cuban intelligence had bought them a shortwave radio, a Sony receiver from an ordinary electronics store. On specific nights, at specific frequencies, an announcer in Havana would read out long strings of numbers.
The Myerses wrote them down. Then, in their apartment, they decoded them using a program the DGI had given them. When they had material to send back, they used more direct methods. Package drops in supermarket shopping carts. A cart left near an aisle. Another cart pushed alongside it. A brief exchange of contents while no one was watching. Gwendolyn, who never received an American security clearance, was the courier. Kendall was the source. By the 90s, they were traveling regularly. Not to Cuba, that would have been noticed. To Trinidad and Tobago, to Jamaica, to Mexico, to Brazil, to Ecuador, to Argentina. In each of those countries, they met Cuban officers who took what they had and gave them new instructions. In 1995, using false identities, they went to Cuba itself. They spent an evening with Fidel Castro personally. Not a photo opportunity, a dinner, a long conversation. The DGI gave them medals for their service. Think about that. While Kendall Myers was sitting at a State Department analyst's desk in Washington with a top-secret clearance, he had already dined with the leader of the country he was serving. James Olson, the former chief of counterintelligence at the CIA, would later describe the damage Kendall Myers did to American national security in one word: devastating. He did all of this without ever taking a paycheck from Cuba. What Havana reimbursed him for, according to court documents, was equipment, the radio, the travel, nothing else. He worked for free for 30 years. Meanwhile, the United States government paid him a federal salary. Over the course of those decades, that salary added up to $1.7 million. The American taxpayer had been funding the Cuban spy inside the State Department. In 1995, the same year he dined with Castro, Kendall became convinced that his boss at the State Department had put him on an internal watch list. He was probably right. American counterintelligence had by then figured out there was a Cuban penetration somewhere inside the State Department. They did not have a name, but suspicion was narrowing. Any other agent would have gone dark. Kendall did not. He and Gwendolyn later told the FBI they had lived for years afterward in fear and anxiety. But they did not stop. On Halloween of 2007,
Kendall retired from the State Department. He kept teaching part-time at Johns Hopkins SAIS, the same graduate school where he had earned his doctorate almost 40 years earlier. He and Gwendolyn bought a boat, a $350,000 Swedish sailboat. They named it Helene. Gwendolyn wrote to the boatmaker that summer to say they sat on deck at 8 in the evening, having a drink, repeating to each other, "We have the most beautiful boat." They believed they had made it out. That was when the FBI moved.
For nearly 3 years, the FBI and the State Department's Diplomatic Security Service had been working a joint investigation. By early 2009, they had narrowed the suspect pool to Kendall Myers. But suspicion is not evidence. To prosecute, they needed him on tape. The plan was a false flag. An FBI undercover officer would approach Kendall, pretending to be a Cuban intelligence officer sent to reactivate him. In court filings, the officer was given the pseudonym Hector. The Bureau chose the date carefully, April 15, 2009, Kendall Myers' 72nd birthday. That afternoon, Kendall walked out of Johns Hopkins SAIS, where he had just finished teaching a class. A man was waiting for him. He wished Kendall a happy birthday. He said he was a friend of Kendall's Cuban handler and that Havana wanted to talk. He gave him a Cuban cigar. A career American intelligence analyst, 60 years of institutional experience, was approached on the street by a stranger who used a birthday and a cigar to claim he was from the DGI. Kendall Myers agreed to meet him at a hotel later that day. There were 3 more meetings after that: April 16th, April 30th, June 4th, all at hotels in Washington, all recorded. Both Kendall and Gwendolyn attended some of them. Every word they said is now in the public court file. Kendall told Hector, "The trouble with this country, there's just too many North Americans." Kendall told Hector about Fidel Castro, "Simply wonderful." Kendall told Hector, "We really have missed you. You, speaking collectively, have been a really important part of our lives, and we have felt incomplete." Then Hector asked whether he had ever passed Cuban intelligence material classified above secret. Kendall answered, "Oh yeah." On June 4th, 2009, at a hotel in Washington, the meeting ended. Kendall and Gwendolyn walked out. FBI agents were waiting in the corridor. A neighbor from their sailing yard in Maryland, when the news broke, told a reporter he felt as though the FBI had arrested Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. The plea deal came in November of 2009. Kendall would plead guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage and 2 counts of wire fraud. Gwendolyn would plead to 1 count of conspiracy. Kendall would receive a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Gwendolyn would receive between 6 and 7.5 years. They would forfeit $1.7 million, the exact amount of Kendall's federal salary over the years he had been spying. Sources close to the negotiations told reporters afterward that Kendall accepted the life sentence in part because he wanted Gwendolyn to have a chance of leaving prison alive. He was 72. She was 71. He was, in effect, buying her a few years of freedom by giving up all of his. Sentencing came in July of 2010, before United States District Judge Reggie Walton. Kendall stood up and read a statement. He did not apologize. He did not ask for mercy. We did not act out of anger toward the United States or from any thought of anti-Americanism. Our goal was to help the Cuban people defend their revolution. We acted as we did for 30 years because of our ideals and beliefs. The prosecutor, Michael Harvey, answered him directly. He is a traitor. He betrayed his colleagues at the State Department and our nation. Harvey turned to the judge. Kendall Myers, he said, was a child of wealth and privilege. He attended a private boarding school. He went to Brown. He earned a doctorate from Johns Hopkins. Kendall Myers could have been anything he wanted to be. He chose to be a Cuban spy. Judge Walton interrupted Kendall's own statement at one point. Kendall had been explaining that he and Gwendolyn had only wanted to help the Cuban people defend their revolution. The judge finished the sentence for him, at the expense of the United States. The sentences were imposed. Kendall was taken to a federal prison. Gwendolyn was taken to a separate one. She was released in 2015. She died the same year. Kendall Myers spent the last 16 years of his life in federal custody. He was transferred eventually to the Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri. Outside those prison walls, the country he had served was quietly falling apart. Fidel Castro died in 2016. Raúl stepped down as president in 2018 and gave up leadership of the Communist Party in 2021. The Cuban economy collapsed. Blackouts became routine. In 2022 and 2023, more Cubans left the island for the United States than in any period since the 1960s. Some crossed by raft, some crossed by land through Central America. The revolution Kendall Myers had defended for 3 decades, from a desk in the State Department, was becoming the country its own citizens were fleeing. On March 12, 2026, Kendall Myers died of cancer in the prison medical wing in Springfield. He was 88 years old. His daughter confirmed the death to the New York Times almost 2 months later. Until then, no one outside his family had reported it. He never gave an interview. He never wrote a memoir. He never took back a single sentence from the statement he had read in court in 2010. For 30 years, Kendall Myers had given up everything he inherited from the American establishment in the service of an idea. It was not a strategic calculation. It was a religious one. So who was he really? A rare kind of American? A true ideological believer? Faithful to a cause he never abandoned, no matter what it cost him?
Or a man from a family that had once helped invent the modern America, who spent 30 years handing his country to a regime that used him and forgot him the moment he was arrested. He is buried in Missouri now. The country he betrayed is still here. The one he served is a memory. Which of these 2 men do you think was the real one?